In the pitch-black waters of the Persian Gulf, the ghosts of global commerce now drift in silence. It is no longer just the massive rust-streaked hulls of oil tankers that navigate these treacherous currents. Today, the menacing silhouettes of military giants loom large, their weapon systems powered up, their missile tubes flooded, and their targeting radars painting a region teetering on the absolute edge of the abyss. The world's primary energy lifeline, the beating heart of the American and global economy, has been brutally severed. Gas prices are skyrocketing, markets are bleeding, and the epicenter of this unprecedented crisis has suddenly and violently shifted from the burning sands of the Middle East straight toward the heart of Europe. By attempting to turn the suffocating bottleneck of the Gulf waters into an impenetrable mine-laden wall, Tehran believed it had drawn a line in the sand. But in their hubris, they expanded their deadly reach, placing not only their regional rivals but the United Kingdom, and by extension the forward-deployed might of the United States military, directly in the line of fire. But what the planners in Tehran failed to realize was that they had just awakened a sleeping giant. Within mere hours, the world would witness how a meticulously coordinated, technologically supreme surprise counteroffensive would deliver a profound and devastating shock to the Iranian regime, turning the desert skies into a rain of molten fire and shattered metal. The era of strategic patience is over. Diplomatic whispers in shadowed corridors have been drowned out by the deafening roar of afterburners and the explosive thunder of open confrontation. The Tehran regime is finally playing its cards completely out in the open, and in doing so, they have signed their own operational death warrant. By placing London directly in its crosshairs, Iran made a fatal miscalculation. They explicitly threatened Royal Air Force Fairford, the legendary British base currently hosting the absolute apex predators of the United States Air Force, the mighty B-52 Stratofortresses, and the supersonic B-1B Lancer bombers. But the wave of Iranian threats did not stop there. They brazenly targeted RAF Mildenhall, the critical hub for the highly classified American EA-37B electronic warfare aircraft, and RAF Lakenheath, the fortified home of the legendary A-10 Warhogs and the cutting-edge F-35 stealth fighters. Tehran believed that by threatening the British soil beneath American boots, they could drive a wedge between the greatest military alliance in human history. They were catastrophically wrong. There was one harsh, unrelenting reality that Iran entirely failed to account for in the storm of propaganda and paper threats it had so arrogantly concocted. Western military intelligence, a seamless web woven by American and British spy agencies, had already mapped out every single critical node, every hidden launch pad, and every subterranean bunker in the region. Long before Tehran even issued its threats, the United Kingdom had already positioned its deadliest pieces across the global chessboard. When the UK Ministry of Defense formally announced the rapid deployment of 1,000 elite British troops to the Middle East, the trap had already been set. Typhoon fighter jets, F-35 stealth fighters, and heavily armed Wildcat helicopters had already woven a deadly invisible patrol network in the skies above the Gulf. Down on the burning sands, Royal Air Force artillery regiments were operating on hair-trigger alert, their eyes glued to radar screens, waiting in the suffocating heat to hunt down the swarms of Iranian kamikaze drones they knew would soon emerge from the darkness. Perhaps these battle-hardened ground units were not yet fully aware that they were standing on the precipice of military history. On this unforgettable blood-red night, they would completely shatter the world record for simultaneous drone interceptions. At that exact moment, a vast array of next-generation military assets were quietly coming online across the region, locking their digital sights onto Iranian airspace. State-of-the-art Skysaber air defense batteries were being rapidly deployed deep into Saudi Arabian territory, digging into the dunes. In the strategic choke point of Kuwait, advanced Orcus electronic warfare systems and rapid-firing rapid sentry missile platforms were powering up to full operational capacity, their phased array radars sweeping the horizon. In Bahrain, highly mobile light multiple launchers were moving into their final, concealed firing positions. And in Qatar, the deployment period for the terrifyingly lethal RAF Typhoon fleet was instantly extended indefinitely. At every single key node along this massive invisible fault line stretching thousands of miles from the island fortress of Cyprus down through Kuwait, across to Bahrain, and deep into the heart of Saudi Arabia, Allied troops, ultra-high-resolution radars, and hyperkinetic missile batteries lay in ambush. This was no mere show of force. This was a layered, multi-dimensional defensive shield woven like an unbreakable steel net across the entire map of the Middle East, specifically engineered to completely paralyze, dismantle, and annihilate Iran's offensive capabilities before they could even cross the border. While Tehran was busy hurling empty threats into the ether, London and Washington had already deployed a rapid, synchronized defensive posture on the ground that would make the most advanced war colleges in the world take notes. The sheer scale and technological terror of this response would soon overshadow Tehran's darkest nightmares. The first major masterstroke was the deployment of the British Sky Sabre air defense system to Saudi Arabia. Make no mistake, this is no ordinary defensive umbrella. The Sky Sabre is an apex war machine, a localized dome of absolute denial capable of independently tracking, targeting, and obliterating 24 separate high-speed aerial threats simultaneously. Armed with the devastatingly fast CAM missiles, capable of intercepting targets at over Mach 3 at a range of 25 kilometers, this system unfurled an impenetrable steel canopy against Iran's desperate volleys of ballistic missiles and cheap drone swarms. Radars, centralized control nodes, Royal Artillery batteries, and digitized battlefield managers were inserted into the theater overnight. Saudi airspace was instantly transformed into a heavily armored, electronically fortified dome. Once the data links synchronized with American satellites, the verdict was clear. Any aerial threat Iran dared to launch would be violently ripped apart while still in the ascent phase. But this Saudi Arabian bastion was just one single interlocking piece of a massive lethal puzzle. On the other side of the treacherous Gulf, two entirely different systems were quietly coming online in the Kuwaiti desert, designed specifically to strip away Iran's most overhyped weapon, the Shahed kamikaze drone. Enter the Rapid Sentry Air Defense System, a highly mobile, short-range kinetic kill platform equipped with the astonishingly precise Giraffe 1X radar. Its sole unyielding objective was to hunt down and vaporize Iranian-made loitering munitions, but it did not fight alone. Deployed right beside it was the Orcus system, a phantom in the electromagnetic spectrum. Utilizing highly classified radar and radio frequency manipulation technology, Orcus is the most advanced counter-drone electronic warfare system on the planet. This system reaches out into the invisible spectrum and strangles Iranian drones before they even know they are being targeted. The synergy between these two platforms represents a total nightmare scenario for Iranian military doctrine. Here is how the trap works. Iran launches a swarm of their cheap, mass-produced drones. Instantly, the Orcus system detects their specific frequency signatures. In milliseconds, Orcus unleashes a devastating electronic jamming barrage, severing the drones from their GPS navigation and blinding their operators in Tehran. As the drones drift aimlessly, completely paralyzed in the sky, the Rapid Sentry system physically blows them into clouds of burning fiberglass and twisted metal. Decades of Iranian investment into a cheap asymmetric drone strategy were systematically and effortlessly dismantled by Western technology in the cold Kuwaiti desert. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the region into darkness, the real hunt began. Iran, desperate to prove its might, unleashed its Shahed kamikaze drones, sending them gliding out of the blackness toward critical infrastructure and allied bases across the Gulf. But they were flying straight into an absolute meat grinder. Royal Air Force artillerymen, lying in dead silence in high-threat kill zones, began picking off the Iranian unmanned aerial vehicles one by one. The very microsecond a Shahed drone crested the horizon, it was instantly painted by ground-based targeting lasers and locked onto by British gunners. The night sky erupted into a brilliant, chaotic light show. In the inky darkness, the Iranian drones were turned into spectacular balls of fire, crashing into the desert dunes one after another in a relentless rain of debris. By the time the sun rose, a new record in the history of modern warfare had been written in fire and steel. A single RAF regiment had completely destroyed 14 incoming kamikaze drones in one night, earning the legendary title of drone hunters. These sharpshooters single-handedly extinguished Iran's delusion of air superiority before it could even breach Allied airspace. Tehran was desperately attempting to turn the Gulf into an apocalyptic battlefield by launching hundreds of munitions every night, hoping to overwhelm the defenders through sheer volume. But the relentless, cold calculation of Allied counter-drone operations was dismantling their entire war machine piece by piece. Yet, this impenetrable ground-based blockade was only the anvil. The hammer was waiting at 30,000 feet. The true trump card, the element that struck pure terror into the hearts of Iranian commanders, was the absolute, uncontested dominance of the skies. Eurofighter Typhoons and stealthy F-35 Lightning II fighter jets, flying alongside heavily sensor-equipped Wildcat helicopters, built an invisible wall of air power. This massive aerial armada, flying non-stop, heavily armed combat air patrols over Cyprus, Jordan, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, blocked every single viable attack corridor Iran possessed. Allied pilots logged an astonishing 1,200 flight hours in the region in the opening phase of the conflict alone. Just pause and consider the sheer magnitude of that number. 1,200 hours of uninterrupted lethal aerial overwatch meant that not a single Iranian aircraft, drone, or cruise missile could even dream of approaching American bases or Allied population centers without being instantly targeted and destroyed. The Typhoons, operating as high-speed interceptors, locked onto targets with terrifying speed and fired beyond visual range missiles to clear the skies. Simultaneously, the F-35s utilized their unparalleled stealth characteristics and incredibly powerful sensor fusion suites to completely blind and map out Iran's ground-based radar networks, silently feeding targeting data back to the rest of the fleet. Below them, the Wildcat helicopters skimmed the waves and the dunes, providing continuous low-altitude surveillance and relaying real-time, high-fidelity intelligence directly to the artillery units on the ground. The combined synchronized combat power of these three platforms working in perfect unison was generating an aura of lethality that outpaced the combined air forces of entire continents. But defense was only half of the master plan. The bases that Iran had so foolishly threatened were, in reality, the staging grounds for the United States military's most apocalyptic retaliation. While the British held the shield, the Americans wielded the sword. From the highly secured runways of RAF Fairford, massive dark gray B-52H Stratofortresses and sleek supersonic B-1B Lancer bombers roared into the sky, their bomb bays heavily loaded. They were launching wave after relentless wave of devastating kinetic strikes, dropping precision-guided JDAMs and long-range JSF cruise missiles deep into Iranian territory. At the exact same time, from the runways of RAF Mildenhall, the incredibly advanced EA-37B Compass Call aircraft embarked on their first operational combat missions overseas. Their objective was not to drop bombs, but to drop the digital equivalent of a nuclear weapon on Iran's command and control infrastructure. The Compass Call aircraft systematically hijacked, scrambled, and completely paralyzed Iran's air defense radars, communication nodes, and surface-to-air missile batteries. Iran was screaming threats into the microphones of state television, but in reality, American heavy bombers taking off from the exact bases Tehran claimed they would destroy were systematically wiping Iran's military infrastructure off the face of the map. By London firmly standing its ground and opening these strategic bases to the United States Global Strike Command, they effectively reduced the flight time for American bombers from an 11,000-kilometer marathon to a rapid, lethal 4,500-kilometer sprint. This strategic masterstroke multiplied the frequency, intensity, and sheer destructive yield of the bombing runs exponentially. Every single base that Tehran threatened was in fact operating as a high-speed ramp accelerating the Iranian regime toward its own absolute demise. A perfectly layered system was now fully operational. Drone hunters holding the line on land, stealth fighters and heavy bombers maintaining absolute supremacy in the air. But the strategic genius of this operation did not stop at the shoreline. London and Washington were actively integrating all of these massive disparate defense layers into one single unified digital nervous system, and the most critical component of this network emerged from the dark rolling waves of the sea. The Eastern Mediterranean Sea became the ultimate cornerstone of this staggering defense architecture. To lock down maritime security and provide an impenetrable shield for the highly strategic air bases in Cyprus, the legendary Type 45 class destroyer HMS Dragon was seamlessly integrated into the Allied air defense network. The incredibly powerful Samson radar system rotating atop the mast of the HMS Dragon began streaming pure real-time telemetry and targeting data directly to the ground-based Stormer air defense batteries, and the American and British F-35 screaming overhead. This was not just radio chatter. This was the ultimate realization of modern network-centric warfare. Fighter jets, guided missile destroyers, attack helicopters, and ground-based interceptors were now functioning as a single, terrifyingly efficient, artificially intelligent organism. The moment an airborne threat launched from Iran, its data flowed into the naval destroyer's computers within microseconds, was instantly beamed to the ground batteries, and the network automatically calculated and engaged the target with the most mathematically optimal weapon available. This immense, flawless integration provided the Allied forces with a hyper-layered defense shield stretching from the sun-drenched shores of the Eastern Mediterranean all the way to the oil-choked waters of the Persian Gulf. It was, for all intents and purposes, a force field of steel and silicon. Simultaneously, massive emergency airlifts of additional Stormer air defense systems were touching down in Cyprus, elevating the strategic island's defense posture to a level unseen since the height of the Cold War. Planners remembered well that Iran had previously dared to launch a drone directly at a British base on the island. The lesson was learned, and the response was overwhelming. RAF Akrotiri was transformed into a fortress. Half a dozen F-35B Lightning IIs and over 10 heavily armed Typhoon FGR-4s sat fueled and ready on the tarmac. Swarms of Wildcat and Merlin helicopters scoured the Eastern Mediterranean around the clock, dropping sonar buoys and scanning the horizon with thermal optics, instantly reporting the slightest anomaly in the water. Cyprus was no longer just an overseas staging post. It had been forged into one of the most heavily fortified, unassailable military strongholds on the planet. Any desperate Iranian attempt to strike the island would be instantly shredded by this multi-layered overlapping kill web, turning their weapons into ash before they even crossed the coastline. Yet for all the roaring jet engines and explosive missile launches happening above the surface, an even deadlier, completely undetectable predator was stalking its prey deep below the waves. Gliding silently through the freezing, crushing depths of the Arabian Sea was the HMS Anson, a billion-dollar Astute-class nuclear-powered attack submarine. Having traveled 5,500 miles across the globe from the port of Perth, Australia, this Leviathan had arrived in the theater completely undetected. Deep within its steel hull, it carried a massive payload of highly lethal Spearfish heavy torpedoes and the legendary, terrain-hugging Tomahawk Block 4 cruise missiles. With a strike range exceeding 1,000 miles, the Tomahawks transformed the HMS Anson into a covert, unstoppable spear pointed directly at the throat of the Iranian leadership. The submarine could surface anywhere from the chaotic vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz to the darkest depths of the Iranian coastline, unleash a devastating barrage of precision-guided fury, and vanish back into the abyss before the first missile even detonated. Even if the Iranian military managed to somehow synchronize every single coastal radar, hydrophone, and sonar system they possessed, finding a remarkably quiet, Astute-class submarine in the vast, noisy expanse of the ocean would be an absolute mathematical impossibility. Operating as a lone wolf, the HMS Anson projected an aura of profound psychological terror, serving as a massive deterrent force that cast a shadow of total uncertainty over Iran's entire coastal defense strategy. They knew the submarine was out there, they just had no idea when or where the ocean itself would open fire on them. With drone hunters dominating the land, stealth fighters and strategic bombers ruling the air, integrated destroyers locking down the sea surface, and nuclear attack submarines holding the ultimate trump card in the deep, the Allied forces had constructed a suffocating, multi-dimensional fist around Iran's military apparatus. But beyond the sheer raw application of kinetic military power, a far greater, incredibly complex strategic chess match was playing out regarding the lifeblood of the global economy. Iran's ultimate desperate gamble was to lay thousands of sea mines across the incredibly narrow, dangerously shallow waters of the Strait of Hormuz. By attempting to choke off the passage of the world's supertankers, they were holding the global economy hostage. Every hour the strait remained closed, energy prices violently spiked, inflation threatened to crush the working class, and the global markets bled billions of dollars. Amidst this economic panic, United States President Donald Trump issued a blistering critique of the United Kingdom, demanding to know why they were not sailing their massive aircraft carriers directly into the Gulf alongside the American fleet. Trump publicly stated that British carriers were not the best, comparing them unfavorably to the colossal supercarriers of the United States Navy. But the response from London was not born of weakness. It was a masterclass in modern, calculated maritime strategy. Why on earth would any sane military commander intentionally sail a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier carrying thousands of sailors into a naturally shallow, geographically confined bottleneck that had just been saturated with thousands of Iranian contact and magnetic mines? To do so would be to offer Tehran a massive, slow-moving target on a silver platter, risking a catastrophic loss of life and a profound propaganda victory for the enemy. The Allied High Command agreed. Instead of relying on brute force in a delicate situation, the United Kingdom unveiled a far more brilliant, technologically revolutionary approach. Rather than risking capital ships, London became the central architect of a massive, unprecedented international consortium. They achieved what Tehran thought was impossible. They brought 35 different nations together around a single table, uniting the globe with one singular mission: to violently break the Iranian blockade and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Prime Minister Keir Starmer addressed the world, announcing that a highly advanced joint operational plan was already in motion. The world was about to witness the absolute pinnacle of naval innovation, as the traditional human-crewed mine-hunting vessels of the past were steadily being retired. The Royal Navy unleashed its most tightly guarded secret: fully autonomous, artificially intelligent drone swarms. The massive Royal Fleet auxiliary ship, Lime Bay, was rapidly modified in the shipyards of Gibraltar and immediately dispatched to the Gulf to serve as the floating, heavily armored command center for a completely new generation of algorithmic mine warfare. This colossal mothership was heavily customized to deploy, manage, and retrieve a vast fleet of unmanned surface vehicles, deep-water robotic drones, and autonomous mine neutralization systems. Developed in total secrecy alongside defense contractors under the MQ program, this operation represented a watershed moment in the history of naval combat. Here is how the future of warfare looks. Sleek, 12-meter-long unmanned surface vehicles are launched from the mothership. Roaming the mined waters completely autonomously, they drag hyper-advanced high-resolution towed array sonars behind them. These robotic hounds scan the dark seabed, detecting, classifying, and mapping Iranian sea mines with terrifying millimeter-level precision. Once a mine is located, the surface drone communicates instantly with the mothership, which then deploys a remotely operated underwater vehicle. This secondary drone swims silently down to the explosive device, attaches a shaped charge, and detonates the mine, sending a geyser of seawater into the sky. And the most incredible, revolutionary aspect of this entire massive clearance operation: it is executed flawlessly without putting a single American or British sailor's life at risk. The human operators sit safely miles away inside the AI-enabled command center, managing multiple drone swarms through a sleek, digitized combat interface. The ability to deploy multiple autonomous vehicles simultaneously meant that vast, highly dangerous swaths of the Strait of Hormuz could be scanned, mapped, and sanitized in a fraction of the time it would take a traditional fleet. The multi-mine neutralization system further accelerated the timeline, allowing the coalition to detonate entire fields of mines in rapid succession. This staggering technological leap forward set the Allied coalition completely apart from any other military force on Earth, rendering Iran's entire strategy of maritime denial completely obsolete. And the United Kingdom was far from alone in this massive endeavor. The sheer audacity of Iran's actions had triggered a massive geopolitical backlash, uniting global superpowers in absolute solidarity. By March of 2026, the heavyweights of the global stage, including France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Japan, issued a devastating joint declaration, legally and militarily committing their resources to shattering the Iranian blockade. Soon after, Canada, South Korea, Australia, and the United Arab Emirates threw their full military and economic weight behind the coalition. The message delivered to the Ayatollahs in Tehran was crystal clear, uncompromising, and terrifyingly unified. By attempting to close the Strait of Hormuz, Iran was no longer just picking a fight with Washington or London. They had effectively declared war on the entire industrialized world. France stepped up to co-chair the highly complex military logistics alongside the British. Japan, an economic powerhouse that relies absolutely on the free flow of energy through that specific strait, injected immense financial and logistical support into the coalition, driven by existential economic motivation. Germany and Italy wielded their massive diplomatic and economic leverage to completely isolate Iran on the world stage, freezing assets and cutting off any remaining lifelines the regime had left. The European allies fully backed the technologically driven unmanned clearance operation led by the UK, deliberately avoiding an unnecessarily massive buildup of vulnerable surface ships while still projecting overwhelming, undeniable power. The global vision was perfectly synchronized. The oil must flow, the global economy must be protected, and the Strait of Hormuz must be ripped open by force if necessary. When you step back and view the sheer scale of the chessboard, the final picture is awe-inspiring and devastatingly clear. Overhead, typhoons and stealthy F-35s fly endless, heavily armed patrols daring any Iranian pilot to take to the skies. At 30,000 feet, American B-52 and B-1B bombers rain precision destruction down upon Iranian military infrastructure, entirely unimpeded thanks to blinding electronic warfare cover. On the ground, laser-precise air defense batteries swat enemy drones from the sky as easily as brushing away insects. Deep in the dark, crushing depths of the ocean, nuclear submarines lurk silently, their missile tubes loaded and ready to strike at a moment's notice. And on the surface of the volatile Gulf, fleets of artificially intelligent, autonomous robots systematically hunt and destroy the very naval mines Tehran believed would bring the world to its knees. Armed with this staggering array of next-generation resources, the unified alliance of the United States, the United Kingdom, and their global partners stood totally prepared on every conceivable front. Tehran's desperate, asymmetric strategy of terror, their naive plan to divide the United Kingdom from the United States and fracture the resolve of the European continent, had backfired in the most catastrophic way imaginable. Instead of division, Iran's actions forged an unbreakable wall of steel and resolve. Every single new threat screened by the Iranian regime only resulted in the Allies deploying a deadlier weapon system to the desert, committing another squadron of stealth fighters to the skies, and welcoming another furious nation into the most powerful international military coalition of the 21st century. In this high-stakes game of global survival, the West did not just meet the threat, they fundamentally redefined the rules of engagement, utilizing calculated, multi-layered, and overwhelmingly superior technological dominance to ensure that the free world would never ever be held hostage again.